Get this set up a little different here. All right. Maybe before we start, because we're right at 7 o'clock here in Santa Fe, just a brief announcement that on Sunday is Sakadawa. Most of you know this holiday that's in the Buddhist calendar. Let me put this over here. Just took it out of the Kleenex box. I'll get better reception, I think. So anyway, Sakadawa commemorates three events in the life of the Buddha: his birth, his enlightenment, and then his parinirvana, passing into nirvana. So it's said to be one of the most, if not the most, auspicious day in the Buddhist calendar. So try to do some wonderful, meritorious things that day. If you'd like to join us here at TNL, we're doing a number of events, but the one thing I'm going to be leading in the morning, instead of having a teaching from to 11:30, we're going to have a practice session of what's called the Global Mani Retreat, kind of recitation of Om Mani Padme Hum, the mantra of the Buddha of Compassion, Chenrezig. So anyway, it'll be a nice chance for us to get together and do some practice together. This is a project that we've put on it started just about a week and a half ago on May 17th in this month of Sakadawa, on the first day of that month. And it's going to continue until November 1st. And on November 1st, we're going to offer all of the mantras that we've accumulated to His Holiness the Dalai Lama for his good health and long life and his wishes to be fulfilled, all that sort of nice stuff. So just know that that's going on. I think there's also a session going on with Venerable Sarah. It'd be quite early in the morning, based on the times. But you can find Global Mani Retreat at the FPMT website and find out more there if you'd like. Anyway, that's the only announcement I have. Let's go ahead and start with our praise to Shakyamuni Buddha together one time. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. And we'll do the short mandala offering in English. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all beings enjoy this. And refuge, as usual, first time in English and then twice chanting the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chunyan gipe sonam gi dola penchir sangye dupar shok Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni Kyabsuchi Daki Chunyan Gipe Sanam Gi Dola Penshir Sangye Drupar Sho. All right, let's do a short meditation to focus the mind a bit, let go of whatever distractions we have from our day. And then we'll set our motivation together by reflecting briefly on a little bit of what we've been exploring in this second part of this course so far. So again, just spend the first few minutes focusing on the breath, whatever technique you prefer, and then I'll come in and we'll set our motivation. No, let's set our motivation for tonight's class. And recall the two foundational topics we looked at in part one. And think about these in regard to your own situation. First of all, having met with the Dharma through the kindness of gurus and beings who are dedicated to helping us and others to fully awaken. And whether or not you feel you have a guru, someone who qualifies for that term, you have teachers in your life. You have beings whose books you've read, who you've encountered in various ways, who are pointing out the path to you. That's the external condition that we've created through our own karma. And we also have created the internal condition through our past actions. The perfect human rebirth. This human life that is rich with opportunity can do so much with this life, especially in regard to our spiritual practice. So this is where we are now, in this situation, rich with that opportunity. But we examined the first topic of this second part in the last 2 weeks, which was the fact that this life is not going to last forever. And in fact, it could end at any time. And what will be most important when death does come are not all the things that we've done in this mundane world, whatever we've accumulated in terms of wealth or friends, or how well we've taken care of this body. All of those things will need to be abandoned. And what will go forward is our consciousness, our mind. And what will determine the path forward are our actions. So we need to be concerned about what we do with this life and how we make the best use of this life, so we avoid unfortunate rebirths. That was the topic we began last week. And there are these states of unbelievable misery that we've been in countless times before. And if we fall to them again, not only will we suffer, but we won't have an ideal life any longer. It'll be very hard to practice anything virtuous, and will only succumb to non-virtue. So this is the situation that we're in. Death is going to happen. And when it does come, we may be propelled into one of these unfortunate states. Therefore, we need to use the time we have very well to generate the most positive aspirations that we can and to engage in actions on the basis of those. And as we've been discussing throughout this course, the most positive, most powerful motivation we can bring to any of our activities is the mind of bodhicitta, the mind that strives to develop ourselves, to actualize our own potential to the fullest degree, not for ourselves, but so that we can benefit all beings. Yes, we will have benefit from this, but the main goal is always to help others, always to lead them to achieving their potential. And the recognition that to do that, we do have to become a Buddha. We do have to become fully enlightened. To generate that mind of bodhicitta that is for that goal, for the sake of all beings, and just kind of rest in that space of bodhicitta, filled with compassion and love for all beings, and a wish to benefit them. And then you can open your eyes fully, and we'll begin tonight's class. So again, in the last class, we did begin exploring kind of the second topic that's within what we frequently call the small scope, the teachings of the person of least capacity. It's kind of, again, your Dharma practice doesn't really begin until you at least have a motivation of wanting to get a good rebirth. If we are solely concerned with the affairs of this life, it's not really Dharma practice per se. It's really just attachment to this life. And we need to give that up in a sense and move towards at least some motivation concerned about our future rebirth. So obviously, as we'll see, we progress through the path, we also can generate the motivation for our own liberation and attainment of nirvana, but then the highest motivation, becoming a Buddha for the sake of all beings. So we left off in the text in the hell realms. Let me just get us all oriented again. Let me put on the screen once more. We have this chart that's from the course that was run at Instituto Lama Tsongkhapa, where I studied. I didn't study this text there, but I studied other texts there. This is the schema, the chart of all of the desire realm. And we looked at this last week. Again, I won't be able to fit it all on one screen, but you see the 3 lower rebirths are on the screen now, most of them. Let me put a little bit further down if I can. The animal realm that we're going to talk about a little bit later, the hungry ghost realm, and then, of course, the hells. And where we made it to last time was really just through what are called the great hells or the hot hells. And we talked about them individually. And then we're going to kind of talk a little bit about the duration of time in there and what have you. We'll go back to the text in a moment on that. I did want to share things in terms of the one hell that was the least of those 8, which was the first one, the reviving hell, where you have this body with these weapons and you're fighting everybody, killing them all and whatever, and you get killed. And then there's this voice and you all revive and you start it over again. It's like a really horrendous Groundhog Day, right? Where you keep doing the same thing over and over again, and it's painful and suffering and horrible. I had a few slides that I didn't get a chance to share. I also didn't share some things in regard to the hot hells in general. I guess I could start there. These were the last couple of slides that I have. I forgot to load them last week. Sorry, they went out there today. But it says here again, the great hells are hot hells. This is from Pabonka Rinpoche's commentary on our text, the middle length Lamrim. If you are born there, your body is an object of incineration and is extremely large, like the size of a great mountain. This was information that wasn't in our text. Furthermore, it is utterly unbearable, like raw flesh being roasted over an open fire. We often say, like, think about what it's like when you burn yourself in just a very minor way on like a barbecue grill or something like that, or grabbing a hot pan or something. The burning that you feel in the hell realms is immeasurably hotter. What we experience in this world doesn't even hold a candle to it. That roasting fire is extraordinarily hot and so forth, so that it is as though there is no way of enduring it. The heat of the fire is also so hot that even though the heat at the end of the eon is 7 times hotter than the fire in the human realms, the fires of the hells are 7 times hotter than even that. The fire at the end of an eon is said to be, there are different ways that kind of world systems come to their conclusion, and there's one where you have the whole world consumed by fire. And so anyway, that's a pretty horrendous fire to burn the entire world. And so again, this would be even 7 times hotter than that. So the one thing I wanted to mention in regard to this continual revival, the first of those 8 hot hells, was just, this is the instruction that we're given to work with this. And I may have mentioned this briefly last week, but it's also, of course, in Pabonka Rinpoche's guide on how to meditate on the stages of the path, which I keep referring back to when I remember to do that wonderful text that kind of gives you how to gain realizations of these topics. This is from Pabonka Rinpoche's, the translation that I like of this Liberation in Our Hands, the Lamrim text. He says, for our meditation on that realm, for example, and this is just an example so you can gain how to work with the other ones, we must first visualize that we have actually taken birth in this place. And you really want to put yourself in the shoes of that being in that hell realm and think, this is me. This is what's happening to me right now. Then we must vividly imagine ourselves being struck with weapons, falling unconscious, and being revived again. It would surely cause us inconceivable great fear and pain in this life if we were stabbed to death with a small knife, just once. Yet this example cannot aptly illustrate the experiences we would have to undergo many times each day in the revival's hell. Again, you just keep going through it again and again and again until the karma is exhausted. And we'll go on to talk about the neighboring hells in a moment. But again, remember the purpose of looking at all of this is to induce some level of fear, to kind of the point where we go, I really don't want a suffering state. If we have conviction that these realms exist, we can have that with regard to the animal realm, but the hungry ghost and hell realms, have some conviction that there are such places that are created with karma, well, then obviously avoid that rebirth. It's only going to be horrendous suffering for ourselves. And as I said, probably put us back in terms of our spiritual path quite a bit. Now, bodhisattvas are born in those realms out of their, right? They can go there and they can try to help, what have you. But, we're not quite there yet. At least I'm not there yet. Maybe you all are there. But so let's go to our text and get started once again. I put a little yellow mark where I left off last time. I'm not going to go into a deep explanation of this paragraph. It just talks about all those different realms that I had on the screen a short while ago. There were the God realms, and they have very long lives. And then down in the lower, the hell realms, extremely long lives. This is just putting the numbers behind all of that. Moreover, the treasury of Abhidharma and the levels of yogic practice state that 50 human years are one day in the God realm of the four kings, 30 of those 1 month, and 12 of those 1 year. 500 such years is the lifespan of the beings of the four great kings. All of that is one single day in continual revival. The one I was just talking about, that's the least of those 8 great hells or hot hells. So all of that lifespan that we just talked about, 50 human years being one day in that God realm, and so on, 500 such years is their lifespan. And all of that is one single day in continual. 30 of those a month, 12 of those a year, 100 of those a lifespan. Likewise, 100 and 1,600 human years from the 33 up to controlling others' emanation. So that's kind of progressing in the more idyllic states of the God realms and the desire realm, and they have very, very long. Their lifespan can be 1,000, 2,000, 4,000, 8,000, and 16,000 God years. These respectively form a day in black line through hot hell, and they can reach from 1,000 through 16,000 of their own years, depending again upon the karmic lifespan that they have for those various realms. In very hot hell, they can reach half an intermediate eon. And in Avicii, the worst of the 8 hot hells, 1 intermediate eon. Again, these numbers are kind of hard to get your head around, but just get the point that if you get reborn in the hell realms, you're going to experience suffering for quite a while. It'll be very hard, again, to get out of those hell realms. You have to wait till that karma is exhausted. Sometimes this is called kind of the not neighboring, they use another term. What is it? I can't remember the other term. But these kind of go around the hell realms where the great hells are. And when you finish your karma there, often you have to go to these, think surrounding it. The word surrounded is in there. Surrounding hells. These surrounding hells you have to often go through to eventually leave the hell realm. So you're not often reborn directly out of the hot hells. You might have to go through some additional suffering to kind of where all that has 4 gates. Iron fence, which also has 4 gates. Outside of each of these gates, there are 4 neighboring hells, these surrounding hells. And these are the 4 that are demarcated here. The pit of burning embers is the first one. The swamp of putrid corpses, or sometimes excrement reeking of corpses. The third is the road of razors and the like. There are like 3 of them there that have similar kind of attributes, so they put them all together in one of these neighboring hells. And then the river without a ford. Okay, so let's just go through these briefly. I don't want to, be overbearing on all of this. The first of these contains hot embers up to the knees. When sentient beings go there looking for a home, as they set their feet down, their skin, flesh, and blood are burned away. And as they lift their legs, their feet regenerate. So this is kind of, you keep going through this, lifting your leg and it regenerates, and then you step back down into the burning embers, and so you keep doing that as you walk through all of that until again the karma is exhausted. Nearby there is the second one, the swamp of excrement reeking of corpses. As they cross it, these sentient beings are again in search of a home. They fall into it and sink up to their heads. In this swamp, there are worms called sharp beaks that pierce the skin, flesh, sinews, and bones, and dig through them all the way to the marrow. Near the swamp, there's a third one, a path fitted with razor-like teeth. When sentient beings walk along it in search of a home, as they put their feet down, their skin, flesh, and blood are lacerated, and as they lift their legs up, their feet grow back again. Near that is the forest of sword leaves. So again, this is all part of the third one. So they're kind of similar in terms of the type of punishment there's suffering that you experience there, these razor-like manifestations. This is the forest of sword leaves. As sentient beings wander around in search of a home, making use of its shade and sitting down, swords emerge from the trees and chop up their limbs and other body parts. When they faint, reddish-brown dogs come up, grab them from behind, and eat them. There are some descriptions of that one that are kind of interesting. The sword leaves is that there's one way that it's talked about where when you arrive there, you see the trees and you start hearing the voices of loved ones from your previous life that are beckoning you to come up the tree. And as you go up the tree, all of the leaves are pointed down, so you just get cut your whole way up there. When you get up to the top of the tree, there's no one there, and you hear the voices down below. And then you go back down, and the leaves all point up, and so you get cut on your way down. Again, pretty horrific stuff. This is just one of the neighboring hells. Again, this is not a major place of suffering in the hell realms, but it's one that many beings have to go through in order to exhaust that karma completely. At the bottom of the screen now, near that, there is the forest of iron spiked trees. Beings wander around there in search of a home and set about climbing the tree. Oh, this is the one with the climbing of the tree. Sorry, I did it prematurely. As they climb up, the tips of the thorns point downward, and as they climb down, the tips point upward, chopping up the limbs and other body parts. Again, they don't talk about in this the beings beckoning you, those loved ones. Anyway, that's this third one of these. For some reason, I thought it was the second one, but yeah, so this is, again, pretty horrific. And then on top of that, birds with iron beaks alight on their shoulders or heads, peck out their eyeballs and eat them. These places are similar and why they're lumped together, and that the harm is inflicted by sharp weapons, so they should be considered as one. Near the forest of iron spiked trees, there's the fourth, the final one, river without a ford, which is filled with seething, boiling water. Sentient beings in search of a home fall into it and are cooked as they bob up and down, like peas thrown in a cauldron of water over a great fire. Remember again, some of these Hieronymus Bosch paintings, or these beings, humans that are floating in this hot pot of liquid and what have you. On each bank of the river, guardians hold sticks. And on each bank of the river, guardians hold sticks, hooks, and nets, and do not let anyone escape. Recall again that these guardians are not other sentient beings. They are a karmic creation of that realm. These beings who do that, that's their job, is to be guardians and inflict torture on sentient beings who are there. Having pulled them out with the hooks or nets, the guardians then place them face upward on the blazing great foundation and ask them what they want. When they say, "I don't know and cannot see anything, but I am hungry and thirsty," the guardians pour molten copper and put fiercely blazing lumps of iron into their mouths. Levels of yogic practice explains that the lifespan in the neighboring and occasional hells, we're going to talk about the occasional hells last, as long as the karmic potential for experiencing them has not been exhausted. So again, a lot of these things, they sound like, horror movies and, really quite traumatic things for beings to go through. And that is the thing they're just suffer due to, again, the very negative karma that they've created. We're going to be talking about the karmic, side of it when we get to that topic later in this first part dealing with the small scope. Now we go on to the cold hells. Now, cold hells, my understanding, I've never really seen it in other traditions, any other spiritual traditions that speak of a cold hell. The cold hells are situated outside the 8 great hells of sentient beings, each at a distance of 10,000 yojanas. 32,000 yojanas below here is blisters, the first, followed by the other 7 cold hells, each separated by 2,000 yojanas from the one above. Again, it doesn't really matter so much. It's just giving some demarcation in Buddhist cosmology as where these are located. But again, don't take it too literally. These are just, again, beings that are in a sense, as real as the one that we are in, but they are a karmic creation in a sort of another realm. In the first one, blisters, you are hit by strong icy winds and shrink from the cold while blisters appear all over your body. In bursting blisters, you shrivel as the blisters burst open. Chattering teeth, crying, and moaning, the next three are cold hells named after the sounds that are uttered in them by the beings there. So it becomes more and more horrific, the cold they have to experience. And again, it's not like it freezes you and then you die. You just keep experiencing it because you have a body that is prone to going through that suffering. In the next one, splitting apart like an utpala flower. An utpala is a form of lotus, a blue lotus, I think. No, sorry, this isn't a blue one. This is blue, I think. As you are hit by strong icy wind, you turn blue in color and split apart into 5 or 6 pieces. And then in the next one, splitting apart like a lotus, you pass beyond blue and turn red, splitting apart into 10 or more pieces. In great splitting apart like a lotus, your skin turns deep red and you split apart into 100 or even more pieces. And again, you have feeling in all of these pieces. It's not like whoops, I'm sorry, need to come out of here. It's not like you, again, are experiencing this breaking up and doing all this, and then you lose consciousness. You're feeling your consciousness in every one of those parts that are going through this torture of being in the cold, freezing, breaking, what have you. So it's, again, described pretty horrifically in terms of the types of things that beings have to experience there. Let's wrap up the cold hells and we'll finish up this whole discussion of hells. Again, all that is explained in levels of yogic practice. As for the lifespan, it is stated that if you were to fill a storage container up to the brim with 50 bushels of sesame seeds from Magadha and take out 1 sesame seed every 100 years. I think there was another Sanskrit term for the amount of sesame seeds. It was 50 of them. And the calculation that we had in the master's program, I think, or in when we saw that term come up, this would be about 2,000 pounds, a ton of sesame seeds, if you can imagine. I mean, just think of a pound of sesame seeds. If you go to the bulk store, whatever, and get a pound of sesame seeds, imagine 2,000 of those. Okay, so you're going to take out 1 sesame seed every 100 years. Well, then the lifespan in the hell of blisters would last far longer than it takes for the sesame seeds to be completely exhausted. And the lifespan in each hell below is 20 times that of the previous one. So 20 times more for the next one, and then 20 times that for the next one, and so on. Just keeps growing exponentially. Okay, what are the occasional hells? The occasional hells adjoin the hot and cold hells. Levels of yogic practice says that they also exist in the land of humans. And chapters on the Vinaya say that they exist near the shores of great lakes, as depicted in the story of Sangarakshita. As explained below, it is very easy to create the causes of taking birth there. You accumulate many of them every day. And since those that you accumulated before are also immeasurable, it is unwise to just sit around comfortably. You should think about them and be afraid, for nothing other than your precarious breathing separates you from them. I think this paragraph is meant to apply to all of the hells. Let me talk just a little bit more about occasional hells. They say that, again, there might be beings where they are, suddenly experiencing in their life something that is extremely hellish. And they might even be experiences of such as a fire that would happen in one's home where one is trapped within it or what have you, and maybe manages to escape. It's occasional. It's based on certain causes and conditions, and it isn't an entire separate realm. So you can have them in the human realm. I think there was one story where there was a butcher who was it was his previous life. He was a butcher, and he would take vows at night, but he was a butcher during the day. And so he was experiencing, I think the Buddha, somebody came to the Buddha and said, what's the karma of this man? He was going through this experience of having this horrific day, like during the daytime, all of this horrible stuff happening. And then at night, he'd be surrounded by beautiful women with all of this wonderful stuff and what have you. And that's how it was explained by the Buddha, was that he had kind of created the karma to have a rebirth where it was hellish for just a portion of the time, and then it was delightful the rest of the time because he created that mixed karma of both, taking vows and upholding good behavior while, continuing to take the lives of beings during the day. So again, this is what can happen sometimes is these karmas can get a little bit mixed. It's not always that pure in terms of a specific existence. And so occasional hells can take a variety of forms in, again, both the lands of humans as well as in these surrounding areas that are near the hot and cold hells. Again, beings would just be taking birth there for a short period of time, and then they would disappear from there. There's a little verse from Shantideva entering the Bodhisattva way from chapter 8, verse 12, which says, having created the karma for hell, how can you sit there comfortably? I mean, if we have created the karma for hell, which no doubt is Tsongkhapa saying, we all have, this should drive us to do a lot of different things, to change our behavior and, of course, to purify, things we're going to look at when we get to the teachings on karma. Letter to a Friend by Nagarjuna also says, evildoers are separated from hell only by the time it takes for their breathing to stop. Those who hear about the boundless torments of hell and are not terrified in 1,000 ways are hard like Vajras, kind of hard-headed. They're not going to budge because even though we hear it, we might not react to it and think we have to avert it. If seeing, hearing, remembering, and reading descriptions of hell and their depictions gives rise to fear, then there's no question about the experience of the unbearable, fully ripened effects. If just thinking about them brings up some fear, well, then actually being there will be immeasurably worse than anything we can imagine. The intense suffering is also described in Letter to a Friend, again by Nagarjuna, just as the bliss of the extinction of craving is supreme among all kinds of bliss, likewise among all kinds of suffering, those of Avicii are most unbearable. The suffering of being brutally stabbed in one day by 300 spears and cannot compare to even the smallest suffering of hell. You need to understand that the cause giving rise to such suffering is your own faulty behavior alone. Again, those karmas that we've created. We'll be discussing those when we get to that topic. Strive with all your might not to be tainted by even the slightest faulty action. Again, same text, Letter to a Friend, says, the seed all your skill, make every effort. Negative. So that's kind of, the lesson that we gain from the hell realms, though it's for all three of the lower realms, that really we need to adopt a more meticulous attention to our actions, avoiding any negative action. Complete. We're going to look at that when we get to teachings on karma. All right, now on to contemplating the suffering animals. Now you might wonder, well, why are animals? Because there are a lot of presentations where animals are seen as the least of the three lower realms. Again, the hell realms at the bottom, the hungry ghosts in the middle, and then the animals, the least suffering. And it is true that they do have suffering. Any one of these might experience less or more depending upon their own individual karma. But it said that actually, I think hungry ghosts do have some ability to hear some teachings and maybe make some difference in their behavior, not to a great degree, but enough to have some control. Whereas animals, we can't expect animals to do that at all, right? Again, I point out often we have dogs here in the Gompa. Sometimes I can be teaching. The dog might be hearing all these teachings on karma and so on, but the dog's not going to change its behavior. Oh, I really need to stop chasing those birds. I'm going to end up in a hell realm, right? It's not doing that because those animals don't have that ability, right? So again, that's sometimes why they place animals further away from the sort of the upper realms, is because they have even less ability. I'm getting a note about, that the sound's going in and out a little bit. Is that happening for folks? Yeah. I don't know. I've got it in the little Kleenex box the way they directed me to. Let me try pointing it up a little bit. Let me try it for a little bit. I know it's not as good here in the Gompa either, but all right, let me try there. And yeah, give me like a couple minutes of talking and then we'll see if it's doing better. All right, so let's go to the animal realm, which again is presented next in this text. In some texts, you might see it after the hungry ghost. The weaker animals, it just dives right in and starts talking about all the suffering that goes on. The weaker animals are killed by more powerful ones. Having become the chattel of gods and humans, they are not under their own control, but under the control of others and lack freedom, which is why they are killed, beaten, and harmed. This happens with a lot of, domesticated animals that are used on farms and things like that, right? Levels of yogic practice explains that since they occupy the same territory as humans and gods, they have no other place to stay, right? They don't have an abode of their own where they can just live sort of on their own. The Treasury of Abhidharma auto commentary by Vasubandhu explains that their primary abode is the vast ocean, meaning that of the beings that exist in the animal realm, the ocean contains the larger portion of them, and that other species evolved from there, which is kind of interesting. This was well before Darwin, right? But there is some understanding in Buddhist kind of cosmology and what have you, that the oceans are where life started and that all these other beings sort of evolved. But we can divide those beings that are animals into those in the oceans and those who do not live in the oceans, land, air, what have you. Another form of suffering, they are born in darkness in the water, and those in the ocean, and they age and die. Worn out by heavy burdens, they are put to the plow, shorn, driven, and killed miserably by many different methods of slaughter. They are tormented by hunger and thirst, sun and wind. They are persecuted by hunters and the like in many ways and are constantly terrified. All right, when you think about, again, the ways that animals that people consume the flesh of, the meat industry, how animals are slaughtered, it's really quite horrific. So you should feel saddened and repulsed when thinking of the many ways in which they suffer. As for their lifespan, the Treasury of Abhidharma states that the longest animal lifespan is 1 eon. I'm not sure what animal that is, and explains that the long-lived ones attain about an eon, while the short-lived ones are unspecified because the time can be anything. And you could get a rebirth as what a mayfly lives for about 24 hours. It's full gestation, right? So it might be quite short as an animal. It could be very long. How's the sound now? Is it a little bit better? Is it? Okay, good. I'm getting some thumbs up. Sorry about that. Yeah, I'll have to make sure I do a little more adjusting of things before. All right, let's go on to these hungry ghosts. Now, hungry ghosts, we talk about how we have some conviction in animals, but it is quite possible that, the sort of paranormal world that many people have some conviction in and even have some experience with is the realm of hungry ghosts, is that sort of in-between world where they inhabit and have some interaction with humans that they have karma with. It's, just my guessing at that. I have never heard, again, any real definitive thing about that, but hungry ghosts or hungry spirits are beings who do have a very specific karma that might be kind of operating in worlds where there's some sort of boundaries with other worlds or what have you. Let's look at their suffering and how they're described, because there are 3 different types of these hungry ghosts in general. Those dominated by miserliness, and by the way, that is the common sort of affliction. When we look at the afflictions later in this second part of this course, miserliness or greed is the main affliction that creates the hungry ghost realm, whereas the hell realm is said to be primarily a product of hatred, anger, and the animal realm a product of ignorance, dullness. So again, those dominated by miserliness will be born as hungry ghosts. They are extremely hungry and thirsty. Their skin, flesh, and blood are so parched that they look like burnt logs. Their faces are covered with hair, their mouths are exceedingly dry, and they keep licking their lips with their tongues. Sound again quite horrific to see. They may be categorized as 3 kinds: those with external obstructions to food and drink, those with internal obstructions to food and drink, and those with obstructions within food and drink itself. The food and drink they have a karma with it to where it transforms into an obstruction in and of itself. First one, those with external obstructions to food and drink. As for the first kind, when they approach springs, lakes, and ponds out of their thirst, right, they are stopped externally by sentient beings holding swords, spears, and lances. They also see the water as pus and blood and lose their desire to drink it. So they have this karma around. As something external to them, it doesn't allow them to get close to the substances that would satisfy their thirst or hunger in any way. The next one, those with internal obstructions to food and drink. The second kind have mouths like the mere eye of a needle. If you had like this very tiny mouth, how could you get much through it, right? And even if you get stuff through it, sometimes their mouths blaze with fire, and they have goiters and swollen bellies. And even if they end up finding food and drink without others having created obstructions, if there's none of those external obstacles, they themselves are not able to eat and drink because, again, of the small mouth and the inability to, burns as it goes down, their mouths blazing with fire and what have you. Those with obstructions within food and drink itself is where the food and drink itself becomes an obstacle, right? Whoops, sorry, didn't mean to do that. Let me pull this thing down that's in my way here. Among the third kind, the 5 garlanded ones get burned because everything they eat and drink catches fire immediately. Just kind of the minute they consume it, it turns into fire. The filth eaters eat excrement and drink urine. They eat and drink only what is unclean, smelly, harmful, and disgusting. Some cut their own flesh and eat that. They cannot consume food or drink that is clean and wholesome. So those are the types that are having obstructions that are internal to themselves, right? Or that are the food itself, the food and drink itself transforming so that when they partake of it, they don't have anything that is a desirable experience, right? Doesn't, again, satisfy because of it catching fire or, being unclean and what have you. Anyway, pretty, again, hard to imagine all of these as well. The Treasury of Abhidharma auto-commentary states that their main abode is situated 500 yojanas below the city of Rajagriha in this world. Again, this world is called Jambudvipa, while other hungry ghosts have spread out from there. As for their lifespan, levels of yogic practice in the Treasury of Abhidharma explain that 1 human month is a day for them, and that they survive for 500 of their years. So again, fairly long, not as long as the hell realms, but still pretty horrific torture they have to go through. Letter to a friend says, enduring suffering uninterruptedly, fettered by the noose of negative deeds, some embodied beings do not die for 5 or even 10,000 years. The commentary explains that the lifespan of some hungry ghosts is 5,000 years and of others 10,000 years. In all 3 lower rebirths, the body size is indefinite, right? You can have everything from the smallest little flea or microorganism in this world all the way to, huger bodies. In the hell realms, the bodies, again, were explained to be quite large. Levels of yogic practice says that the power of the non-virtues gives rise to varying sizes. Because if you have a larger body, you obviously tend to experience greater suffering, not exclusively, but accordingly, when you think about the sufferings of the lower rebirths, you should reflect, if it would be difficult for me to sit for 1 day with my hands stuck in embers, 1 minute with my hands, 1 second with my hands stuck in embers, I mean, seriously, or simply to stay in a freezing cave during a winter storm without clothes, or to be deprived of food and drink for a few days, or for my body to be bitten by flies and the like, then how could I bear the sufferings of the hot hells, the cold hells, the hungry ghosts, and the animals that devour one another alive? You should meditate while evaluating such experiences until a change of heart occurs, giving rise to intense fear and terror. I have a little note here about, something I want to share. Let's see. Geshe Lungdap Sopa gives advice on the fear arising in this meditation and his steps on the path to enlightenment. I'll go to that in just a moment. Let me stay with the rest of this page and then I'll share that with you. But, the whole purpose of this meditation on the lower realms is to induce some fear, but not a neurotic, terrifying fear, a fear where we understand there's something we can do, a wholesome fear that motivates us to engage more wholeheartedly in our practice. So as you think about this now, with your good rebirth, you can purify whatever non-virtue you have accumulated previously and lessen what you might engage in later on. And these are topics we're going to see coming up a few weeks in karma. Your intense aspirational prayers will direct the virtue you accumulated previously, thereby multiplying it and open up many avenues for engaging in them anew. I mean, that's the impetus is we abandon non-virtue and we engage in more virtue. So we create the causes for better rebirths. Every day there will be some new way to make your freedom meaningful. If you do not think about this now, then once you have fallen into the lower rebirths, you will not find a refuge that protects you from those fears, even if you look for it. We're fortunate because, again, we do have a refuge in the teachings that have been disseminated through the kindness of our teachers and so on. And we can investigate them with this human life. He concludes by saying, at that time, you will lack the power of mind to adopt what should be done and discard what should not be done. This is explained in an Entering the Bodhisattva Way. And my note there is that the verses are some verses, and maybe I'll share those on the screen in a moment, from the great treatise that are from Shantideva's text. And so you can take a look at those and have some understanding of the implication of these meditations. That if we are going to take this all seriously, well, then we have to stop creating the causes to be reborn in such places. So I missed a few of my slides. Let me just talk a little bit about the neighboring hells. This was just a little bit different information from Pavankar Rinpoche. There are 4 neighboring hells. Again, we saw those surrounding hells. They're spread out beyond the great hells. And he actually says there are 2 ways of being born there. You can come there, as I described, from the hot hells, the great hells. So you have to pass through them. Or you actually can end up there from the beginning. So there are lesser karmas we've created where you are reborn in those 4 with the putrid swamp and all those others. So again, that was just something that I found interesting because, again, it wasn't in Tsongkhapa's text. According to the first, when you emerge from whichever of the 4 doors and the iron fence surrounding the hot hells is appropriate, you are then born there in the neighboring hell, right? You take rebirth as soon as you exit from the iron fence that is in the hot hell that you were in. On the cold hells, the earth underlying all these cold hells is solid ice, and there are snow-covered mountains on all sides. So this is kind of interesting. He gives more of a description of the environment there. They don't receive even the slightest bit of warmth from the sun, are pitch black, and are enveloped in a violent storm of snow and rain. A freezing hard wind blows and strikes the hell beings' bodies, whereby their flesh and bones become so frozen they are barely discernible as migrating beings. This is the type of freezing circumstances they must live in. What needs is there to mention having clothes to wear? They don't even have a flat mat between them or beneath them, and they are born completely naked, whereby they are extremely cold, which causes them extreme torment. These are the shared sufferings of the cold hell. So all beings in the cold hells, all 8 of them, have that basic environmental karma. And then they experience the individual, the blistering and the bursting and what have you. On the occasional hells, this is how Geshe Thupten Lodin, his book on the path to enlightenment. The occasional hells are suffering situations that are sometimes experienced in the human realm. These situations resemble a human realm, for example, by being consumed by volcanic fires or frozen in ice. Those caught in car accidents in which the cars burst into flames experience suffering similar to the beings in the wailing hell. Beings crushed in an earthquake experience suffering similar to the mass destruction hell, and so on. You have different occasional experiences that happen in the human realm. During wars, there are many environments that could be considered occasional hells. They are called occasional hells because the environments do not remain as hells forever, but may change according to a person's karma. So again, I thought I'd share some of that because that was giving more flesh to the occasional hells and what happens there. Again, this was just reiterating the 2 types of animals that were briefly alluded to, those that live in the ocean and those ranging on the surface of the earth. Most live in the depths of the ocean, in the dark recesses between the continents and so on, like a mass of leftover grain at the bottom of a beer vat. Those roaming the surface of the earth live in the human realm as large birds and so on, and are the ones that we presently see. And we don't see a lot of the creatures in the oceans. We do see some of the larger ones and what have you. This is the bit that was alluded to in that little footnote in the text. This is what Geshe Sopa says around the fear that we should be generating when we're engaged in meditating on this topic. You should meditate this way until your fear is so palpable you feel it is physically unbearable. You want to produce as much fear as you possibly can. Usually we worry about senseless little things. This is not the same. Ordinary anxiety leads to lower rebirths, misery and pain. This kind of fear leads to the spiritual path and highest happiness. If you have strong and constant fear of this type, you will always be aware of what you are doing. It'll make you very attentive to your behavior because you don't want to create for even a moment the type of karma that would induce a rebirth in those realms. You will intercept negative thoughts and attitudes and maintain positive attitudes and action. Every benefit can be achieved on the basis of this special kind of fear. And it's a very powerful and positive fear. It's not something that we, we end up getting neurotic about. This goes on then to refuge. So we're not going to talk about refuge quite yet. That's the next topic. So again, the setup with these two topics that we've looked at already now in this second part, the setup was that we have to gain some appreciation and concern for our future lives. The first of those topics was that death is going to happen and we don't know when. And at the time of death, it'll be important what we've done with this life. So we have to have kind of an appreciation for that. That's kind of getting us into the ballpark of thinking about the impermanence of things and how we need to use what time we have well. The second one is to give us that trepidation around potential results we could end up in. Future existences that are not going to be so favorable. And as I said, it's the suffering we're focusing on here because that's the initial impetus. We can also think from different perspectives, like in the Mahayana perspective, well, if I'm reborn in those realms, how will I be able to benefit other beings? I'll be blocked from doing that because most of my time will be consumed with the suffering of those realms. You can think that, but the main impetus at this level of the stages of the path is to think, I'm going to suffer in those realms. Therefore, I want to avoid that. I may have mentioned this in the previous class, but when we start approaching these topics, it's not that different than the way that we try to avert suffering in this human life. I always use this example, like if you go to the doctor and the doctor's done your blood work and then he looks at it, she looks at it, whoever, they say, guess what? If you don't change your behavior, you're headed right for coronary disease, you're headed right for diabetes, blah, 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 blah. They'll go through the whole list of what your statistics are showing in terms of elevated cholesterol or all these other things. And so you hear that, and the doctor gives you advice, right? Says, well, what I think you should do, change your diet, get more exercise, do this, do that. And if you have some regard for your future suffering, you change your behavior, right? And you say, okay, I'll at least try to eat less of those things and more of this other and da-da-da-da. Get exercise when I can. And then, there's some kind of taking, acknowledging that what we do is going to have an effect on our future experience. If we kind of curtail some of this behavior now, we will have a longer life or we'll hopefully be, healthier if we live that long. Again, as we saw, there's no certainty to when death happens, but it's a way that we can relate to this. We're just talking about suffering that goes beyond this life. We're talking about suffering that could be in our next life or lives beyond that. That if we don't attend to these things, we could end up in those states very easily. So again, that's the way I always frame it, is just to see that it's just the Buddha being very compassionate and kind, like a doctor. You don't tell the doctor, well, you're horrible telling me all these awful things that could happen to me on the basis of my current diet. You're thankful. You're like, thank you for pointing that out. I'm glad we did the blood work and that you gave me this little lecture, because now I can change things. Now I know what I can do to make sure that I potentially have a longer life if I take care of my health. Right? Okay. Now we're going on to refuge. The second part of this, and we're going to see it right at the beginning of this chapter, is pointing out that this is the second topic within this, the small scope or the teachings of the person of least capacity, relying on the means then to gain happiness in future lives. So if the dilemma that we were looking at with death and lower rebirths was that we could end up in these unfortunate states and we need to be concerned about what happens after this life, now we're going to look at the two things that are the means to gain happiness in future lives. 2 points within it are, first, we're going to begin tonight, training in going for refuge, the holy gateway for entering the Buddha's teachings, the Dharma. And secondly, generating the faith of conviction in actions and their effects, the root of all well-being, which is referring to karma. We often use karma as a shorthand for actions and their effects, causes and effects. And essentially, it's referring to the causes, the actions, literally. When we get to that topic, we'll see that. But we can use it in a general way to refer to this law of karma, that we have to experience the effects of the actions we've engaged in. And we'll, again, examine that in more detail. So these are the two main topics, refuge and karma, that we're going to be looking at for the remainder of this part on the person of least capacity. So, training and going for refuge, the holy gateway for entering the teachings. This has 4 points. We're going to look first at the causes of going for refuge. Where does that mind come from? What are the thoughts that feed into it? Based on those, secondly, the objects to which you go for refuge. You have to know what the refuge objects are. And then thirdly, the way in which you go for refuge. There are a variety of ways that you can go for refuge. It just means different thoughts and things that you can bring to mind that influence your refuge in slightly different ways. And then finally, the stages of training after having gone for refuge, which again are speaking to the vows, commitments that were not really vows per se, but they're commitments. They're pretty strong, maybe not as strong as a vow, but they are a commitment that we make when we take refuge in ceremony or even in our own minds. And we'll talk a little bit about that later in this section on refuge. The very first of these, the causes of going for refuge. By the way, I might mention before we go into this in too much, we don't use this word refuge in our culture so much, maybe some. We talk about refugees, right? Maybe we're all refugees, trying to escape from these sufferings that we've just examined and what have you, and seeking a safe refuge. The term that Alex Berzin uses, which I like to introduce because I find it kind of sits better in my mind, he, instead of taking refuge, he uses the term finding safe direction. If we look at our lives, we've had a direction to our lives, and we'll see this when we get to the teachings on karma, that has not been so good. It's a direction that is going to lead us to these unfortunate states and lead us away from liberation and enlightenment. We want to find safe direction. We want to find something that is safe for us and our future and what we are trying to achieve. Again, one thing that I'm going to emphasize as well when we go through this topic, it's presented here in the teachings of the person of small capacity, least capacity, because it's the beginning of our movement towards at least getting a good rebirth. Remember, those higher states are one of the two main goals the Buddha taught. But refuge carries on. Refuge is not going to be taught again in a formal way in the other levels of the stages of the path, but it is increased as we move through the path and we gain a deeper sense of refuge when we start looking at the teachings for the person of middling capacity. And then when we get to the person of great capacity, the Bodhisattva teachings, our refuge takes on an even deeper dimension there. So refuge isn't something static. In fact, Lama Yeshe, apparently, I never studied with Lama Yeshe. He predates my involvement in Buddhism in this life. But Lama Yeshe used to use the term doing refuge. It's, I'm doing refuge. Doing refuge, it's an active thing. It's not just a thought I have occasionally. Oh, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Oh, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. It's you're doing refuge. You're actually engaging in that safe direction, in putting your life in the proper way, an appropriate way, so that you get the results that you seek. It's all informed, of course, by our understanding of the teachings. So the Dharma jewel is one of the three objects of refuge that we're going to be talking about. And it's the most important one, really the actual one. It's how we, engage in, true refuge, finding, that safe, good direction for our lives. So anyway, those are just some initial thoughts before we go into this. So this is the kind of preliminary thing going into this. Although in general there are many causes for refuge, here it is the fact explained above that we do not stay in this life, but soon die, and that after death we do not have control over where the force of our karma will send us to be reborn. I mean, technically, we're going to get to where there are two main causes or kind of convictions that we have. This is one of the thoughts that feeds into it, right? Because this is what we just looked at. The first two topics of this section of the Lamrim. I'm not going to stay in this life forever. I'm going to soon die. Death could come anytime. After death, I don't have control over where the force of my karma will send me to be reborn. And I could end up once more in those unfortunate states. So those are the kind of preliminary thoughts that feed into it. We're going to see these two causes of refuge, the ones that are generally delineated on the next screen, I think. But there, again, we'll go through this. This is one of your homework questions on this topic. Regarding karma, entering the Bodhisattva way says, just as lightning on a cloudy night illuminates the darkness for a moment, likewise, through the power of the Buddhas, a rare wholesome thought appears in the world. This is what they often say is like, it's due to the Buddhas, due to those beings who are trying to help us that we engage in any type of virtue. We have through our teachers, learning the teachings, the variety of things in our world that encourage us to engage in more moral, upright behavior. And on the basis of those wholesome actions, we actually do have some causes we create for happiness and for good rebirths. But it happens very rarely. It's like lightning on a cloudy night that flashes and illuminates for a moment and then it's gone. Therefore, he says at the bottom there, virtue is perpetually weak. while evil is very strong and quite unbearable. We tend to gravitate towards non-virtue. And it's not that we are inherently evil beings or something. It's just what we've become familiarized with, what we are habituated towards. So this is the next part of it where he delineates the two main causes. So then, thinking about how you will fall into the lower rebirths, most likely, right? Because the power of wholesome karma is so weak, while that of unwholesome karma is extremely strong. The preponderance of the karma we create in a lifetime through the force of our attachment and anger and so on is mainly negative, mainly unwholesome. That thinking will give rise to the two convictions. These are the two main causes. First, once again, that word fear. You have to have some level of trepidation, apprehension, fear of the lower rebirths. In this case, it can be elevated as you go through the stages of the path, but it begins with your own fear of ending up in one of these unfortunate states that we just looked at tonight. And faith. Secondly, this is the other main cause, the main conviction. The faith that the three jewels, so rare and precious, can protect you from them. Consequently, if these two remain but words, going for refuge will be similar. Again, like Lama Yeshe says, you have to do refuge. You can't just say refuge. Oh, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. If those are the words on your deathbed, but no thoughts behind it, no actions behind it, what will it matter? But if they are strong and firm, again, throughout your life, your going for refuge will come to tame your mind because you'll apply the Dharma when you need to as you go about your daily life. Therefore, put in effort into generating those two causes. So they often just, narrow these down to fear and faith. We have fear as the main impetus that kind of gets us to think about, I need protection. I need something that's going to help me avert these unfortunate states. And of course, all the other sufferings that come and so on. But mainly, we're focused once more at this beginning point at that next rebirth, making sure that we have, I use the term future life insurance, that our life in the future is going to be insured to be a good one. We've done what we can to do that. Well, we need something to guide us in that, some way to move us in that direction. And then secondly, we have to have some faith and confidence that the three jewels in particular that we're going to take refuge in have the ability to do that for us. I'm going to go back to my slides and talk a little bit about refuge and then even share the ways in which we can have a strengthening and deepening of that fear by kind of moving through the three levels of the stages of the path. So this is how Geshe Sopa talks about this whole topic of refuge. He says, those who follow the Buddha's instructions can be freed. The necessary element from our side is taking refuge. And taking refuge also does not mean saying, please take me to the Pure Land, please wash my sins away, please take my suffering away. We have this orientation sometimes from other spiritual traditions we've been involved in, like praying to a creator God to have the things that you want and so on. That's not what we're doing when we are taking refuge. Taking refuge means relying upon the Buddha's instructions that will help you. The Buddhas liberate beings through teaching them reality, teaching them the truth, teaching them the teachings, the Dharma that will help them. So taking refuge, Geshe Sopa says, means I trust you. Please give me the medicine and I will take it. We often use this analogy of the Dharma being the medicine, the Buddha or the gurus and so on being like the doctors that we go to for the medicine. And then the attendants and people who can help us to take the medicine are the third jewel, the Sangha. But the medicine is the one that will cure you. The doctors can't cure you without the medicine, nor can the attendants, the Sangha. We need to take the medicine. So he says, then that is the way to cultivate your relationship with the three jewels. Then you and the Buddha will be working harmoniously together, kind of on the same page, moving in the same safe direction. The Buddha moved in that direction, is guiding you to do the same. This is from, again, Geshe Lodin's Lamrim book. Every result depends on its proper causes. There are two causes, as we just saw in Tsongkhapa's text, that create proper refuge. And he delineates in his presentation, the first of which, fear, has three parts. And this is, again, where I'll go through this. This isn't in our text, but I think it's important to understand that refuge doesn't just it's not just generated on the basis of fear of the future rebirths. It's also based on fear of suffering in general, in samsara, and then also the fear of other suffering, which is what the kind of higher level motivation is. So the first one is by reason of a state of mind terrified of or having fear of, first, again, the sufferings of the three lower realms. That's the domain of the small scope, the person of the least capacity. You generate that trepidation around ending up in a hell realm, a hungry ghost realm, an animal realm, and then you generate a sense of fear that compels you to take refuge in the three jewels with some confidence in their ability to protect you from that. The second bullet point there is in pertaining to the middle scope, the person of middling capacity, where they look at the bigger situation we're all involved in to achieve that certain goodness, the definite goodness of liberation. So there you have a mind that's terrified of the sufferings of psychic existence in general, where we see that even if we get a good rebirth, a human rebirth, there's still suffering, there's still dissatisfaction, we're still in an unsatisfactory state. We'll get into those teachings later in part 2. That's all encompassed in this second part of the course. The third one is the Mahayana, the person of the greatest capacity. This is the certain goodness or definite goodness of enlightenment that we seek when we have a mind that is terrified not just of our own suffering in the lower realms or in cyclic existence, but the sufferings of all beings, all living beings, where we actually generate kind of a universal concern so that we aren't thinking only of our own situation. We are terrified that any being has to continue to suffer. All right. So that just gives you some idea of, again, refuge having different dimensions to it and strengthening and changing as we move through the Lamrim. But initially it's presented with that first one. The second one is the same for all of these, but it's a different level of it each time because it's the confident belief that the three jewels of refuge, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, have the power to protect you from the above sufferings based on the valid reasons that are presented below, which we're going to go into in just a moment. So essentially, this is what we are looking at in refuge, is that we feel a sense of needing to find something, again, a safe direction, something we can rely upon that will help address initially the predicament that we're going to potentially end up in a lower realm. Secondly, that we are going to continue to cycle in existence endlessly. We've been doing it since beginningless time and been there, done that too many times. It's time to get the heck out of here. The third one goes beyond our own situation that we did in the first two and looks at that universal concern and a wish for no being to suffer. We actually have a sort of fear of others having to continue to suffer because we haven't yet been able to help them to find the causes that will lead them to freedom from that. So that's the idea behind these initial causes. Again, fear is not always a negative thing. I pointed this out before in other classes, but in the traditional studies that are part of the basic program where you look at Lamrim, the minds and mental factors, you actually don't find fear listed there. It's like we have 51 different little aspects of the mind that we analyze. Some of them are the afflictions and some are the virtuous mental factors and some are playing a more functional role. But we don't see fear on the list. Where does fear come from? Fear is obviously, it has kind of a changeable nature to it. Sometimes we can have very neurotic fear that causes us to even harm other beings, right? We can have a fear that is wholesome, like we're trying to generate here and looking at the lower rebirths. But understand that it's sort of implicit that fear is definitely something we need to develop in our minds in that more wholesome way. And of course, when we have it in a neurotic way, to be very careful that it doesn't lead us down a path of creating non-virtue. And we can try to curtail it as best as we can. But fear, can be very positive. And faith is one of the virtuous mental factors. And faith in Buddhism is not a blind faith. It's actually this faith of conviction or confidence saying, yes, I can rely upon that. I have investigated it. I've come through experience to feel that it is a stable support. And therefore, I can move forward with it. I can find my safe direction in it. That's the idea behind the faith. It's not, oh, please, Buddha, you must be out there. I hope you're out there, help me. It's really saying, okay, Buddha's given us everything we need to do to change our situation. It's up to us to do it. Okay, so now the second topic within these four, based on those two causes, faith and fear and faith, the objects to which you go for refuge. This has within it 2 points. We have to first identify the objects of refuge, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And then secondly, look at the reasons why they are worthy to be a refuge. And because this is the thing, we have to gain that second factor of faith, conviction that the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are reliable. So to identify them, we have a little verse from Praise in 150 verses. I think this is by Maitracitta. Anyway, it says, the one in whom all faults are perpetually, completely absent, the one in whom in every way all excellent qualities abide. If you have good sense, you will go to such a one for refuge. It is right to praise and honor them and to abide in what they teach. I like to prefer not using the male pronoun there simply because, again, the historical Buddha was a male figure. And oftentimes when we talk about taking refuge in the Buddha, we might be referring to the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha. But you have more than one Buddha. You have countless Buddhas. Buddhas don't have a gender per se. They appear in a form where they often have a gender of male, female, whatever. But, we need beings who have done this. As it says there, all faults perpetually, completely absent, and in every way, all excellent qualities abide. Most of you have heard this before as well, but that wonderful word that we recited in the refuge prayer at the beginning of tonight, sangye, has that connotation. Sang means to completely purify, remove all faults, all obstructions, anything that is kind of inappropriate in the mind, all the way down to the subtlest level. Gye means to fully develop and cultivate all the positive qualities. So a Buddha, a Sangye, is a being who's done that work, who has completely removed everything that is negative and obscures the mind and completely developed to a limitless degree all these amazing qualities of loving kindness, compassion, wisdom, and so on. So that's, again, if we had that in a being, isn't that who we want to rely upon? Somebody who's done that amazing work and developed their potential to that degree. And to, again, honor them and to abide in what they teach. In the middle of the page there, then, thus, if someone has the intelligence to differentiate between a refuge and what is not a refuge, it is appropriate for them to go for refuge to the undeceiving protector, the blessed Buddha. This also characterizes the Dharma jewel and the Sangha jewel. I put a little note on there because there is a chart, chart 5 in your charts from ILTK. There's a set of them that are in your handouts and other charts, charts and other handouts. I think that's the folder that I put on the Google Drive for you. And that kind of shows what constitutes each of the 3 jewels. And let me just go to that very briefly. I don't want to get bogged down in too much of the detail. This is a topic where you can do that very easily. But nonetheless, I don't want to just skirt over issues either, because this is important as we're going through this to have some understanding of these topics that we're looking at. This is what handout 5 looks like. It essentially has, the top part of it is talking about the different, as they call, bodies. It's the word kaya in Sanskrit. And don't think always physical bodies like we think about our body having a physicality. Let me make this just a little bit larger. Whoops, that might be a little too large. Let me see. I can get at least some of it on the screen at a time. We have these ways that you can present what the experience of a Buddha is. The top part of this that's on the screen now, where you see the labels 2 bodies of a Buddha and 4 bodies of a Buddha, when we divide it into 2, the first of the 2 is on the left there, the truth body or the Dharmakaya. This is the personal experience of a Buddha. It's kind of like the way you have in your internal world that is your own mind and your own awareness of things, right? That no one else really has access to. You can talk about it to other people, say what's going on, but essentially that is your own private experience. That is manifest in Buddhahood. Your Dharmakaya, your reality of that mind that is fully developed, has 2 aspects to it. The emptiness of that mind and the mind itself that is imbued with that wisdom and the knowledge of all things, that omniscience. I'm not going to read every bit of this. You can take a look at it on your own. Again, it's in those charts. That personal part of the experience is accompanied by a social part of your experience in the same way that we are embodied beings that can socialize with others and talk to them and what have you. Buddhas need a way to come from that Dharmakaya and manifest in the world. Therefore, they need form bodies, which are physical bodies. These are Rupakaya in the Sanskrit. And there are two types of those. So just as there were two types of Dharmakaya, there are also two types of Rupakaya. And these are different ways that Buddhas manifest the form body that appears to what are called Arya Bodhisattvas, and only those who have realized emptiness directly, who are pretty advanced on the spiritual path. There is an abode where they live, a pure land where those beings go there and access them and have teachings and further their spiritual development in the company of that manifestation of a Buddha. Everything else, all the other ways that Buddhas appear for the sake of sentient beings, are called emanation bodies, Nirmanakaya. So the Sambhogakaya is a unique one that will manifest in a pure land where beings access it that are Arya Bodhisattvas. Nirmanakayas can be accessed by anyone who has the pure karma to experience that being. And so that's the form body that appears to sentient beings with that type of karma. Now, they say that Buddha Shakyamuni himself was what's called a supreme emanation body. He appeared in this world to show the aspect of how one attains enlightenment and so on. And he had a physical form that was an emanation body, a Nirmanakaya, but a supreme type that was beginning to turn the wheel of Dharma in this world. Okay. So essentially, yeah, this is the two different types of form bodies. So if we put them together as two, we get just the two on the left. If we put them together as four, we get all four. In some presentations, they do it as three bodies of a Buddha, and they leave out the nature truth body, this one at the top, Svabhavikakaya, which is the emptiness of a Buddha's mind. They just include that in a Buddha's mind. So you essentially end up with the Dharmakaya as one, and then the two Rupakaya, the Sambhogakaya and the Nirmanakaya. Again, don't want to go into great depths on this. This Holiness and Venerable Children's book in their series, the 10-volume series they have, I think it's the fourth one, Following in the Footsteps of the Buddha, has a nice presentation on the various bodies of a Buddha and the three jewels. What I want to look at in a little more detail is what's at the bottom of the screen there, then the three jewels. You have Buddha jewel, Dharma jewel, and Sangha jewel, and they each have a unique component, though we can say that they can come together and have sort of intersections in terms of beings. The Buddha jewel, in a conventional sense, this is one presentation. I have seen different presentations of this. Any representation of the Buddha. So the Buddhas that are on, the altar behind me, these statues of Buddhas, Thangka paintings, what have you, we can say that's a conventional way that Buddhas are in our world, in those forms that are painted or created out of metal and stone and what have you. But the ultimate jewel are the four bodies of a Buddha. That's who we really want to rely upon, are those beings who have attained that state, who can be active forces in our lives. These representations of the Buddha can help us and can inspire us, but they are not equivalent to the ultimate Buddha jewel. In terms of the Dharma jewel, the conventional is any text of Buddha's teachings. And we often call that the scriptural Dharma jewel. The scriptures, the texts, that's the conventional way that Dharma appears, because we have to have access to text, just like we're studying this text, right? We're looking at these words that are written down that give us the meaning of what the Buddha taught. The meaning of it, when we actualize it in our own minds, are what we mean by the ultimate Dharma jewel. Those are what are called true paths. Paths are consciousnesses where we have realized the Dharma, where we have taken those teachings that we've read and meditated on, and they become a part of our mind, specifically when we've had that insight into emptiness. Again, that is the demarcation for becoming an Arya, a superior being. Those true paths are accompanied by true cessations. True cessations are when a portion of what obstructs the mind is removed. So as we gain deeper and deeper realizations of emptiness and continue our path, we acquire the ultimate Dharma jewel in terms of that true path and the accompanying true cessation that occurs. It's like each time we realize emptiness directly, there's another little layer of obscuration that we remove from the mind. And then eventually, when you get to the culmination of that process, you remove the last obscuration in the mind, the subtlest, and you cross that threshold and become a Buddha. Essentially, that's the path that we undertake. The Dharma jewel, we often start, though, by relying upon the conventional Dharma jewel, right? We need to rely upon the written teachings and the way that they're disseminated to us and so on. Then we gain those ultimate Dharma jewels in our own mind as we gain the realizational Dharma, the understanding of emptiness at a much deeper level, a non-conceptual level. Let me finish off this, and then I think that may be all. Well, I might have time for a little bit more. We'll revisit the text for just a little bit. What are the Sangha jewel? The Sangha jewel are actually beings as well. The Buddha jewel are beings. The Dharma jewel is not a being per se. It is a consciousness or a cessation, or again, the written scriptures. But the Sangha jewel are beings who have practiced the Dharma. And in a conventional sense, we can say that a group of 4 fully ordained beings, men or women, are the conventional Sangha jewel. They often say that the Dharma exists in a country where you have at least 4 fully ordained beings. So that is conventionally what we mean. But are those four fully ordained beings ultimate Dharma Sangha jewels? Well, it depends. They'd be ultimate if they are an Arya or a superior being. In other words, if they have realized emptiness directly. So those are some delineations that are there. Why it often says ultimate there too is that those are the more ultimate ones we want to rely upon. Initially, we have to rely upon the conventional because we don't have an ability to cultivate the ultimate in our own minds or even necessarily know who has that ultimate in their minds. But we acquire some understanding of the Dharma. We eventually integrate it into our own minds. We then become an ultimate Sangha jewel. And as we continue the process of removing what is negative in the mind and all the obscurations, we eventually become the Buddha jewel. So when you become a Buddha jewel, you are the sort of incarnate 3 jewels. And our gurus and teachers, as we saw in the previous part, we ideally want to see as that embodied 3 jewels. The guru is Buddha, the guru is Dharma, the guru is Sangha also, right? The guru is the creator of all happiness. To all gurus, we make this offering, a little offering prayer that we often use. We'll talk about that when we get to the commitments of refuge. We want to always offer our food to the 3 jewels before we partake of it, and our drink for that matter. All right, so that's just kind of a brief sort of remedial 3 jewels, giving you an idea of what they're delineated as in terms of conventional or ultimate. There are, as I said, slightly different presentations of that, but I think this one's fine to go with. It's not in our text. Unfortunately, Lama Tsongkhapa in this presentation doesn't really go into that. Let's see if we can finish off this little bit here. There's another text that is cited, 70 verses on going for refuge at the bottom of the screen there, which says, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are the refuge of those who want liberation. So, let's see, what time is it? Let me go ahead and stop here. This will be a good place to come in. But this is an important topic. I mean, we have to understand why these 3 jewels are reliable. Again, this is the second part of this objects of refuge. The first topic in refuge was the causes of that, and then the second one is kind of the objects of refuge. We've just identified them somewhat briefly. We're going to go on to, in the next class then, to look at the reasons why they're reliable. And why do we have that faith in them? Why can we generate that? And some of you already have some, familiarity with that through your own practice and study, but we'll examine that next week. So we got about 5 minutes till we're going to do our discussion. There's some questions or comments that people would like to make. Did the microphone thing hold out okay? It was good? Okay, good. Oh, there's one in the chat. Sorry. Is the primordial mind the same as Dharmakaya? Oh, geez. Well, these terms primordial mind, I mean, these come up sometimes in different discussions of different presentations. I mean, we can say that if we talk about, because in this tradition, we tend to talk more about like the clear light mind. The clear light mind is presented most kind of explicitly in the tantric teachings. Remember last week I talked a little bit about the death process and how they say at death, all of these grosser levels of awareness fall away and we end up at the clear light mind. The subtlemost mind that could be called primordial, if you will, because it has been there since beginningless time, is our clear light mind. And we kind of manifest that at the time of death. And of course, when we completely remove everything that is obscuring the mind, that's what the Dharmakaya is essentially, is that clear light mind with the properties of having completely removed everything that would even temporarily obscure it, as well as developing all these amazing qualities that accompany it. So we can be this enlightened being helping other sentient beings on their path. So we could say that the Dharmakaya is the same as that at the level where Dharmakaya is achieved. At the level now where we have a clear light mind that is obscured, of course, we can't say that we already possess the Dharmakaya. We possess the raw thing from which the Dharmakaya will manifest when all the work is done, if you will. And this gets into the topic of Buddha nature to some degree. We have Buddha nature divided into really kind of two components. And the one that we tend to think of Buddha nature as is the fact that our minds can develop into the state of a Buddha. They have the raw material, which is that pure, clear, primordial mind that can be manifested fully in Buddhahood. It's not yet. I mean, it has to be developed. That's the trick, right? I mean, if we were all enlightened already, we'd know it. I mean, we wouldn't be experiencing the problems and suffering and everything else that we are. So that we call that developmental Buddha nature. That Buddha nature is this sort of seed, if you will, that can develop into the state of Buddhahood by doing the work that is taught by the Buddha on the path, right? Everything we're doing in this course, all the tantric teachings and so on that help us to actualize that in its fully developed state. That's one aspect of Buddha nature. The other aspect of Buddha nature is called the naturally abiding Buddha nature, which is the fact that throughout all of this time, we've always been in there's no inherent stain in the mind. The mind has always been fundamentally pure, which is, again, not saying that we've always had the Dharmakaya. We've always had the pure mind, that primordial mind, if you will, that is the basis upon which our enlightenment will occur. It's like the work we have to do is based on that idea that these stains in the mind, everything that pollutes the mind, obscures the mind, are not inherently there, because nothing is inherently there. Things don't have inherent existence. They can be removed. They can be, gotten rid of, because they're not in the true nature of our minds. Your anger is not in the nature of your mind. Your anger arises within the mind, obscures the mind like a cloud in the sky, but it is not the nature of the mind. The nature of the mind is fundamentally pure, and none of those things, they're all there adventitiously. They don't exist, but for the fact that we haven't created the causes to refute them, to get rid of them. So that's the idea. I mean, that's the way. We don't usually use the term primordial mind quite that much in this tradition. I think they use it, and I see it in some of the Nyingma teachings and what have you, Rime teachings, but it's the nearest thing I can correlate it to, is because you have had this clear light mind from beginningless time. I know we always want to say, but where did that come from? Where did that come from? There has to be a beginning, but there is no beginning. You've always had that. You've always had this kind of pure essence. The teachings on Buddha nature, by the way, are one of the texts that are studied in the basic program. I hope you all hang in there long enough for that one. I taught it here a few years back, and there's these wonderful similes that are used, 9 similes of Buddha nature that are like a gold Buddha statue that's inside encased in dirt and mud and what have you. You have all these different things. It's like we've got all this stuff that we identify with that is the kind of gross outside, but within it is this kind of naturally pure thing. And again, that's kind of inspiring, I think. I grew up Catholic, where I was taught that I was sort of fundamentally flawed from the beginning, and I needed something outside of myself to overcome all of that, with original sin or what have you. Buddha says that, yes, you have had these obscurations since beginningless time, but they're not in the nature of your mind. You have that fundamental purity. So have confidence in that too, and that can be the basis upon which this whole transformation takes place. So, wow, long answer to that question. Maybe one more question before we do discussion. What do I mean by the word pure when referring to this mind? Well, we mean that it is not stained in any way by any of the factors that are in the mind right now. It has a natural purity. We can talk about it meaning also that, there's nothing inherently existent. This is what emptiness is referring to. So whenever we talk about inherent, we mean something that is kind of identified from its own side. It has its own way of existing on its own, independently, self-sufficiently, self-established. If things existed that way, if your anger existed on its own, self-established, you couldn't get rid of it, in a sense. We would always have anger in our mind. Well, the mind is pure in that it doesn't have any of those stains inherently there, because there is no such thing as an inherent stain. Nothing taints the mind in that inherent way. that innate way, right? Or not innate, maybe innate's not quite the right word. We do have some sense of an innateness of things born that are inborn. Talking more inherently or intrinsically. Intrinsic is another word. Things don't exist in and of themselves. They exist on the basis of causes and conditions and all the other factors, and therefore they can all be changed. And in the basis of the pure mind, none of that resides there in a kind of permanent way. It's all residing there based on causes and conditions. It's adventitious. So the mind is pure. I mean, it's the same, the concept that I often use in talking about this is a glass of water, you know. I've got something that's similar in this little vase here with the flower. Maybe I take the flower out for just a moment. So we have this glass of water, right? And it's clear. You can see through it to some degree. It's got some facets in the glass, so it's not completely clear. But if I go out into the yard here and put some dirt into it, that's like the stains in our minds, right? It makes the dirt opaque and you can't see through it. But does it actually remove the clarity of the water in a lasting way? No, because I could run that dirty water through some sort of filter and it would remove all the impurities and the clarity of the water would return. The clarity or the purity of the water is always there. It's just impacted by the conditions that are going on at the time. What we're trying to do in the Buddhist path essentially is make that clarity manifest, that primordial purity manifest by removing all the dirt, all the things that obscure it. And again, also advancing and enhancing all the things that complement it in terms of these positive qualities. Good. Okay. Well, people are too kind. Okay, the comments. Okay, let's take our little break for those who would want to do some discussion. I'm going to do discussion with Stephen. We'll hang out because it's going to be the only one left. Some folks are leaving at the break. So I won't be joining you in any of the Zoom rooms, but please stay on if you can to discuss things. Let me put on screen really quickly what you're going to discuss, which are a couple of questions from last week. Homework questions for 2-2. Let me put that on the screen. And they are the last 2 points. You're certainly welcome to revisit some of the other ones, but Avicii and all that was the second question. Number 3 is any 3 of the various ways that animals suffer. Maybe talk about that a little bit and try to relate to that. Please identify the 3 types of hungry ghosts, different types of obscurations that they had, and describe one way that each of those 3 types of experiences suffering. Then you can go on to the very first part of quiz 3, which I have put out there, and I did the answers. The answers are out there today as well. I think we can't really go beyond number 1 there, the 2 causes of going for refuge and the 3 jewels. And again, what are those thoughts that Tsongkhapa said that kind of give rise to those? Those were also part of that orange section that I highlighted in the text. All right, so again, we'll discuss until 5 minutes before the hour. If you're leaving and have to leave, then please dedicate all this positive potential so it's not wasted. It goes for the enlightenment of all beings. All right. And I'll see you all back here again at 5 minutes too when we conclude discussion and see you. Okay, so what came up for folks? Anything that needs to be discussed or commented on? Anything?
I think we were discussing, and we had quite a few examples from different peoples of human beings who are having these hellish experiences. Like we're talking about esophagus cancer, pancreatic cancer, and people who just can't have food because it's like hell. It's like feels like heat and poison and whatnot, just so painful. So I guess my question around that, we talked about the occasional hells. So is it that for those people, I mean, if it looks like a hellish experience from our perspective, so is it that we can, as human beings, like you say, animals can't exist outside of God or human realms. So is it that even with hungry ghosts, even with those other experiences outside of the human experience, can we partially experience those? I don't know what I'm trying to say. In this human existence, can we have health experiences as human beings, like real hungry ghost experiences, even though we haven't been reborn as? So can we be partially reborn as a human and then a hungry ghost? I guess what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like there must be some karmas that we create that are similar to a hungry ghost experience, whether, or even a hellish experience, whether they're technically the occasional hells. They don't talk about occasional hungry ghosts, but you could also have, I mean, again, various experiences that would seem similar. But again, I'm imagining that these are just actions that have ripened into various results that we are experiencing now. And it could be even due to purification. They often say that when we talk about purification, one of the effects that we can see is that we don't get the full-blown, fully ripened effect. We get something that is lesser. And so instead of a hungry ghost rebirth, maybe because you've purified or whatever, you have an episode where you've got an illness where you can't eat anything or drink anything because of various conditions, blisters in the throat or something that have to go away or whatever. So I just see them as kind of in that realm of similar types of karmic results that could be based on actions that could have led to a rebirth in those existences, but are ripening into something lesser, perhaps, or a shadow of it or something. But I mean, there are some people, I have heard some Buddhist students who, when they read these things about all the various realms, that they in their own mind, they think, well, I just see them reflected in various human experiences. I don't want to think about them as being complete other realms. Now, I don't know how they deal with animals in that regard, because animals we can see are sentient beings in another realm. We can definitely get that they're not having a similar experience to a human. But it is true. We can certainly see that some of the gods of the desire realm are like the people who are billionaires and trillionaires or whatever in our world, who have these very idyllic lives, who don't have to worry about grosser forms of suffering. Of course, they do have to suffer from some of that at times, but in general, they have very idyllic lives. And then we can see the demigods as maybe people who are like the nouveau rich, who are coming in, and they don't have as much as the people who are really rich, but they're envious of them and kind of battle with them to, you know, get to their ranks or whatever. And then we can see, of course, human beings just having a general human experience, animals having that, and even human beings who have animal-like experiences, where they are essentially living the same life as an animal. And then hungry ghosts, like you said, I would look at what goes on in impoverished parts of our world where there's famine and what have you, people with big bellies that, are due to bloating and what have you from that malnourishment. And then we have the hellish types of experiences, those that are mentally or physically being tortured by various factors in this human realm. So we can see like mirroring of various things, but I still want to have the conviction that there are physical realms, if you will, where this stuff is happening as real as it is in this world. Nothing is, inherently there. They often use this example when we talk about emptiness, that three different types of beings can have a different experience of what is simply a glass of liquid. If we have a glass of liquid on a table and the human beings see it, we might all see it as water, because that's the karma that we have as human beings to experience that liquid substance. The hungry ghosts that we talked about earlier tonight, they come upon it and it's pus and blood. It has a totally different appearance, but it's this, in a sense, the same base. And it doesn't have any inherent pus and bloodness to it, just like it doesn't have any inherent waterness to it. And then the gods come in, the gods are going to partake of it. They see it as ambrosia, as this nectar. So either, in a sense, that's what emptiness means, is that there's nothing inherent in the base that makes it what it is. The information that kind of fills in the appearance that it has for beings is our karma. That's why the tantric path is so much about kind of purification of our karma through holding a pure view, through the karmic seeds that you're creating, through holding the view of yourself as a Buddha, and that eventually becoming your reality, because you can purify that through purifying your karma. So it's kind of interesting. I think there are a lot of these sort of threads that can run through, and we can see different karmas that are very similar to these realms. And that's one way to relate to these realms. But I also think we need to see them as products of sentient beings' karma that are as real as this world is for us. So, yeah, thanks for that, Aphasia. Anyone else? Any other comments tonight before we conclude? Just a couple minutes after. Sorry, I'm keeping people a little late. All right. So let's go ahead and conclude and do our dedication prayers. Let me get those on the screen. I'll have to change the file here. We pull this down, find the prayers. There they are. Go to the dedication prayers. All right. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may we quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. And let's go to the prayer for His Holiness. Again, just talking about karma, this is also a karmic creation. To have these beings like His Holiness in our world means that we have to continue to create the karma to have their presence. So we're doing in this prayer is trying to generate that through our strong wish that His Holiness remain, have good health, a long life, all His wishes to be fulfilled, and the same for all the other beings who we have as guides who are abiding with us now. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And the karmic creation of having Rinpoche manifest in this world in another incarnation is also something we need to be attentive to. So recite this prayer with the wish that that being be identified as quickly as possible and everything be auspicious for that being to be of incredible benefit to all beings. Excuse me to sneeze. Sorry about that in the microphone. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge, sorry, of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings, through explanation and practice, you wear the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss! Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels, and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Let's dedicate for all the beings that we're holding in our hearts right now, beings in parts of the world where there's great suffering and strife, as well as those that we know directly in our lives who are going through obstacles, illness, who are dying or who have died. Send this positive energy out to those beings, gladly giving it away to them so they can experience the fruition of that in terms of removing their suffering and helping them to find true peace and happiness. And may this be so for all beings through what we've done here together tonight. All right, thank you all. I'll see some of you maybe on Sunday, and some of you maybe earlier, who knows. And next Wednesday, we'll have our next class in this area. So thanks so much for being here, participating, especially in the discussion group. So, all right, everyone, have a good week.